This week, Joshua Drew talks to us about his lifelong journey in compliance. First, a word from Nick Gallo about the ethics verse.
Your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. Hi, this is Nick, Chief Servant at Ethico and host of the Ethics Verse, the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. The Ethics Verse is our weekly free webinar series where we invite the top minds in the ethics and compliance space to share their knowledge on topics that matter most to people on the front lines. These are not thinly veiled sales presentations. These are weekly sessions that help you elevate your impact and build an authentic culture of integrity with tactics on how to sustainably crowdsource risk intelligence at scale within your organization. Join this special community each week to build your network, earn free CEUs, win the hottest books in the ethics and compliance space, and gain insights you can implement immediately to expand your impact and reinforce your culture of integrity. You can continue to be the hero within your organization. Go to ethico.com/CPN to book a demo, sign up for the Ethics Verse, and download the exclusive white paper by Tom Fox, 2023, The Year in Compliance.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. Now, I'm absolutely thrilled today to have with me Joshua Drew, proving that everyone in compliance is related by no less than 6 degrees of separation. I've known of Joshua for many years. He's now at Miller and Chevalier. Joshua, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've known of your work for years as well.
We're going to go into your background in some detail, but you have worked with and for some of the most interesting projects and assignments and companies who have gone through their own compliance journey. So could I start with asking you your professional background and your current role? Sure.
I'm currently, as you mentioned, a member at Miller and Chevalier in the litigation group. After law school, I started with the Justice Department through the honors program and ultimately was with DOJ for 10 years, both at Main Justice in the fraud section and as an AUSA in the District of New Jersey. And then after leaving government, I've had several in-house roles, all with companies that were facing DOJ enforcement actions. I was with a pharmaceutical company that was dealing with a False Claims Act case, and then later at Hewlett-Packard and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise during the time of their FCPA resolution, and then joined VimpelCom, which is now known as Vion. And that company also had a major FCPA resolution and post-resolution monitoring by DOJ and an independent compliance monitor. And then that brought me to Miller.
When were you with Main Justice?
I was there from 1999 to 2003. So in some ways, the pre-modern era in the fraud section, things were really just changing at that time regarding FCPA enforcement.
Did you work with Peter Clark?
I did. I know Peter very well. He was the head of the FCPA unit when I was there, which, as your listeners probably know, and I'm sure you know, was much, much smaller. Actually, my wife, who I met in the fraud section, is very close with Peter. She was part of his team, along with Philip Urofsky. And there wasn't much more to the FCPA unit than that in the early 2000s.
So I was with a company that was under a monitorship with Peter's firm. So I got to know Peter in that role. He was not the monitor, but he was obviously a resource to the monitor. And I rarely get the chance to visit with someone who worked with Peter. So I see him as you said, maybe a precursor, but certainly a lot of what Peter did at the FCPA unit really led to some of the growth of the FCPA unit in cases. And frankly, I don't think Peter gets enough credit for that, but he was a great resource to me when he was in private practice. So I was just wondering if you could say a few words about Peter.
Peter's a delightful guy and a great lawyer. And I agree, he really laid the foundation for much of the FCPA enforcement that grew later in the 2000s and over the last 15 or 20 years. He took the responsibilities of the fraud section incredibly seriously, both in terms of providing expertise to U.S. attorneys' offices that had venue over FCPA cases, but also in terms of the international coordination efforts through engaging with the working group at the OECD. So he doesn't get as much credit as he should. He really made a big difference in building out those enforcement efforts when I was at the fraud section.
Josh, I often talk to lawyers who have been AUSAs or worked in offices of across the United States. I often talk to former Main Justice lawyers, but I rarely get to talk to someone who's been both. So I wanted to ask you if you could maybe explain to our audience the difference between working at Main Justice and working in a U.S. Attorney's office, or at least the U.S. Attorney's office you worked with in New Jersey.
It's an interesting question. Thank you. I thought the biggest difference comparing the two jobs, which, at their core have the same mission, the biggest difference was that when you're a Main Justice prosecutor, you're always from out of town. And you're coming into a district where you're not known, you don't have any history, and that can make navigating the grand jury, dealing with pretrial and probation, appearing before the judges, negotiating with the defense bar, all is more challenging because you're not a known quantity in the district. You don't have those relationships with all those people and entities. When I was in AUSA, I was a repeat customer. I had established relationships with all those judges and arms of the court and the defense bar. And it really made practicing much more enjoyable because I was part of a legal community in the district.
What was the nature of your practice at the U.S. Attorney's Office? Was it white-collar prosecution? Was it national security? All of the above, none of the above?
It was largely white-collar economic crime cases, and I did a fair amount of public corruption work during the end of my tenure. So it was a mix, but primarily in the white collar vein. And so any type of mail fraud, wire fraud, securities fraud, healthcare fraud, tax, money laundering, and then the corruption statutes.
Josh, you then moved to the private sector and went to work in the corporate world. And you worked with two companies who had significant FCPA enforcement actions with what I think could be characterized as some pretty egregious underlying facts. But you were part of the team that helped them get through that journey. And I wanted to start with HP. What was your role at HP? And then how did your professional background from the DOJ really help you in not only your role, but helping HP navigate the journey that they were on?
Well, I joined HP right at the end of 2010, and the company had just received notice of a DOJ and SEC investigation of potential violations of the FCPA. So they were dealing with those issues, and so partly I was hired to help manage the response to those investigations by the company, and also ultimately took on a role leading investigations. My DOJ background was really helpful for those responsibilities. I was able to help the company and its very capable outside counsel deal with the ongoing DOJ investigation, which lasted several years. Because of my experience having worked at DOJ and, both in the fraud section and in a U.S. Attorney's office. The general counsel at HP at the time was himself a former AUSA. So we had a good connection. And then in terms of of shaping up the internal investigations process at the company, I'm biased. I think that DOJ experience is the best training when it comes to leading investigations, and was very valuable in that role with HP. And the company was very committed to overhauling its investigation process and improving it. So we added more internal lawyers. We created regional teams. So we sort of distributed down some of the decision making in the internal investigations and allowed the company to be more nimble. And ultimately, we ended up tackling an issue that plagues a lot of large companies with extensive internal investigation process, which is the time it takes to complete investigations. We conducted this sort of a modified Six Sigma process, and really were able to ratchet down and reduce the time it took to finish investigations, which had all sorts of benefits for the company.
Josh, I talked to a fair number of lawyers in private practice who do external investigations and will occasionally report to the Department of Justice when appropriate. And they, to a person, tell me the single most important thing they have is their credibility with their counterparts at the DOJ, whether that's in document retention, whether that is in information provided, whatever the situation may be. Is the same true for a lawyer in-house doing internal investigations like you did at HP?
I do think the same is true. So, when you're doing internal investigations at a company, you have internal clients, essentially stakeholders who are interested in both the process and then the substantive result of the investigation. And at the end of the day, and it took me a moment to realize this when I went in-house, but internal investigative teams need to be aware that most of the employees who are investigated are not going to end up leaving the company. And so they may not be happy with the result, but they need to have confidence that the internal investigative process has integrity, that it's fair and objective. So nobody likes to be investigated, but at the end of the day, they need to at least have confidence that they've been treated fairly by the company. And so that's what we really strive for. And it is similar to, maintaining credibility with DOJ when reporting on investigative activities from an external investigation.
Josh, you then took a move to a company formerly known as VimpelCom, now known as Vion. Once again, a significant set of underlying facts, a massive settlement, and a DPA and monitor in place. What intrigued you to take that job, number one? And then what were some of the either challenges or really successes you felt like you were able to bring as the CECO at Vion?
I was intrigued by the challenges at Vion, and there were also personal reasons that the job was attractive. My wife and I had made a family decision that we wanted to live overseas, and so we were looking for opportunities to do that. But I went into the recruiting process. I clicked with the general counsel there, and ultimately joined the company, and it was a great experience. We were there in Amsterdam as a family for 4 years with our 3 then small children and 2 cats. All made the move and lived life on 2 wheels in Amsterdam. And professionally, it was a fantastic set of challenges. The DPA was in place. The monitor had not yet arrived. And the company had reached a resolution relatively quickly as far as these cases go. And so there was quite a bit of remediation and improvement to compliance and controls to be done.
What were, I have worked with a monitor, so I understand that there can be challenges in working with a monitor. What do you, from the CECO perspective, what do you see as the role of a monitor in helping a company through the DPA process?
So the monitor has a couple of key imperatives, in my view. One is to ensure that the monitor and the monitor's team are meeting all of the obligations and fulfilling all the responsibilities that is set forth in the resolution documents, and really doing that job as described in, typically in attachment D, and doing it well. The monitor also, to be successful and to help the company be successful, should have a collaborative, transparent, and constructive approach, and really have strong communication and kind of a very transparent agenda and no surprises. And if the monitor comes to the engagement that way, and so is meeting the obligations as defined in the resolution process and satisfying the goals that DOJ has for the monitorship, but also engaging in a constructive and collaborative way with the company, that leads to the best result.
You were successfully able to navigate the deferred prosecution agreement that ended, and then you moved on to Miller Chevalier. Could you tell us about what led to the move to Miller?
I got to know Miller because the firm was counsel to VimpelCom, and so I interacted with a number of the lawyers at the firm over several years while I was in-house at VimpelCom and Vion. And so really that was the most attractive thing about the firm for me is the people. I got to know them well. They're very good lawyers, they're great people. Many of them are names you'd be familiar with. Kate Atkinson, Will Barry, Andy Wise, Mark Rashan. And those are the type of people that I wanted to practice with. The firm also, has practice areas that fit well with my experience. Very strong in FCPA work, also do False Claims Act cases, general litigation, white collar. And I always liked the firm's profile, a bit smaller, strategically focused, really subject matter experts on many of the issues that arise out of a DC practice. So for all those reasons, it was really a no-brainer from my perspective.
What is your role at Miller now?
So I'm on the litigation team, and I hope that it's really sort of bringing strength to strength, that my skills and experience really complement those of the firm. You mentioned monitorships and those challenges. The firm has done a number of monitorships. I have experience dealing with monitors. So I'm looking to build on the fine work that they've done and help, with strategic growth that is a priority for the firm.
I'd like to turn to some of the pronouncements we've had really over the past year from the Department of Justice, and maybe have you explain your understanding or help compliance professionals. And I want to start with the speech Kenneth Polique gave in January of 2023. It had a great catchphrase that all of us have used, and that, of course, was the need for speed. The need for speed in self-disclosure, the need for speed in your investigation, the need for speed to turn over information to the Department of Justice. And it struck me that if you accept all of those, that puts an incredible amount of pressure on a corporate compliance function to intake information, whether it's from a whistleblower, whether it's from internal controls, to assess, to pick up the phone and call someone like yourself, and then have someone like yourself do the investigation, consult with your client, and make a decision. And so maybe if we could start with that, how do you see kind of this need for speed playing out in the investigative realm?
So I think the key elements that were announced in that speech and then are now part of DOJ policy were all largely consistent with longstanding DOJ practice. There are incentives, strong incentives now for companies to get to the bottom of potential misconduct, and those incentives are, were and after the Kenneth Polite speech still are tied to three main categories. A voluntary self-disclosure at the earliest possible time, full cooperation with the DOJ investigation, and timely and appropriate remediation of the issues identified. At the end of the day, there is intense pressure on doing the internal investigation, doing it right. But to a large extent, the requirement and the expectation for the external law firm that's supporting the company with that work has not fundamentally changed. There's a need to move quickly, understand the facts, and be alert for opportunities for advocacy while cooperating. I think that you hit on in your question one of the important aspects of these, continued emphasis from DOJ on the need for speed, which is that companies have to be set up internally so that they react appropriately and quickly to potential issues, and it brings us back to the importance of a strong compliance program, and particularly the sort of internal reporting, speak up culture, and then an adequately resourced and competent allegation management process, so that the company's not losing time with its own triage process before issues even make their way to an external firm for that firm's help with the issues.
Joshua, I have viewed the decision to self-disclose to the Department of Justice, at least in the FCPA world, as one of the most difficult decisions a board of directors may face. And one of the dialogues that I've seen over the past several years is something along the lines of, has the DOJ incentivized companies enough to do so? And I'm going to maybe start with the FCPA pilot program. You may even look further back. But certainly with the pilot program, there were financial incentives put in place with potential discounts. That was formalized in the FCPA corporate enforcement program, announced by Rod Rosenstein. And then, once again, Kenneth Polite and Lisa Monaco expanded that with the corporate enforcement policy or program, policy, in January of 2023. And then the discount pilot programs under clawbacks and consequence management, so that there are a variety of packages and potential incentives. Have the incentives moved far enough along with a potential 75% discount off the low range to not warrant that significant discussion? Because I think the discussion's always warranted at the board level, but really to make that, in many ways, very difficult decision.
It is a difficult decision. It'll always be a difficult judgment. DOJ is definitely increasing incentives. All the programs you just described do that. I mean, look, they've been clear now. It's clear in the policy. There's, companies can get a presumption of a declination if they voluntarily self-disclose, they cooperate fully, and they make timely and appropriate remediation. Now, what satisfies DOJ, and because it's their view ultimately that is determinative as to whether the company has met all those elements. It is a case-by-case analysis, and so that will always be an issue that internal decision makers who are wrestling with self-disclosure question have to grapple with. But in addition to the incentives, which are greater now, companies also have to consider that there are now so many more ways that their internal problems could come to light if they don't make a disclosure between the various reporting channels, the potential for competitors to come forward, the whistleblower programs, the use of social media, the increased enforcement activities by DOJ's overseas counterparts. All of this, creates a downside risk for deciding not to disclose and means increased uncertainty, which companies don't like. But there's no magic bullet when dealing with these issues. That companies need to investigate, understand the facts, move as quickly as they can, and then make a decision based on all the information that they have. The best decision in the best interest of the company, given the information that they have, and it's always going to be a difficult judgment.
Josh, in October of 2023, Deputy Attorney General Monaco announced a new safe harbor policy for mergers and acquisitions under the FCPA. I wanted to maybe ask your take on that. I saw that policy as a continuation of something that started at least in 2008 with what I call the Halliburton opinion release, because I was with Halliburton, so that's what we all called it. But also the 2012 FCPA guidance first edition talked about a safe harbor, and then that was brought forward as well. Do you view this policy as a fundamental change, a continuation, or perhaps something different?
I see it as a continuation. And the firm put out a piece. I'll make a plug for that at the time that the policy was announced, and we viewed it as working to integrate the voluntary self-disclosure and presumption of declination approach that I was just describing into the M&A context by setting this safe harbor period. One of the things we noted in the piece is that there are still some questions that might give companies pause, particularly around the feasibility of completing due diligence and remediation in the prescribed timelines. But to answer your overarching question, fundamentally, I see it as a continuation of the historical efforts going back to at least 2008.
Josh, we've talked a lot in this podcast about the investigative aspect, both in-house and as external counsel. I'd like to turn now to the remediation component of either the corporate enforcement policy or anything else you might want to bring it under. And why is that so significant in helping a company avoid a monitorship if the company is going through their own FCPA enforcement process?
Look, DOJ is increasingly sophisticated about these remediation issues, and it's an opportunity for companies who may find themselves engaging with DOJ to take advantage of the fact that there are prosecutors who are more knowledgeable about compliance on the other side of the table. look, the head of the fraud section is a former chief compliance officer. He's hired others with in-house experience. What we try to do is, when reporting on investigative findings as part of cooperation with DOJ, to at the same time engage on compliance and controls issues, to talk about that part of the analysis, what the ramifications are of the misconduct findings for improving compliance and controls. This is now part of the standard attachment C that DOJ uses in FCPA resolutions, and there's emphasis on a root cause analysis. So it's been the case for many years that companies work to remediate as they go as part of their cooperation if they're under investigation. But there's really an opportunity for each of those touch points in updating on misconduct investigation to tie off with a focus on compliance and controls as well. And that, working that vein over several years, which is what these investigations often take, will put the company in a much better position when it comes time to talk resolution. They're not introducing the compliance program and improvements for the first time in those end game discussions.
Josh, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted any more information on yourself, the firm, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
MillerChevalier.com has great resources for people who want more information, firm publications, news and events, and profiles of the great lawyers at the firm I mentioned, as well as myself.
Josh, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me. I hope we can continue this conversation.
Thanks, Tom. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for the time and the opportunity to be on the podcast.
As I said at the opening of this podcast, this month's sponsor is Ethico. And Ethico will provide compliance champions like yourself with an ethics and compliance optimization system to turn goals and guidelines into real ROI for your compliance program. To learn more, go to ethico.com/CPN and a special white paper offer. If you've enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll subscribe, rate, and review wherever great podcasts are listened to. The award-winning FCPA Compliance Report is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.